I think every seller has a vision of who the right buyer is, and we need to unpack that. And when I work with clients on creating exit options, it's just that.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast, presented by Cornerstone International Alliance. I am your host, Nick Olsen. On this show, I get the opportunity to talk with the brightest minds in lower middle market M&A. Together, we discuss industry intelligence, deal management, shared successes, specialized expertise, and much more. If you serve the small to medium-sized business owner, this show will offer you tactics and insights you can use and implement now to become a master in M&A. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast. Today's guest is Laurie Barkman, who is the founder of Business Transition Sherpa and a nationally recognized growth strategist, speaker, and exit advisor. She's a former $100 million CEO who successfully led her company through an acquisition by a Fortune 50 buyer. Laurie is a certified exit planner, M&A advisor, and the author of the Business Transition Handbook. She hosts an award-winning Succession Stories podcast, where she shares insights on ownership, transitions, and exit planning. Today, she works closely with engineering, architecture, and design firms, owners to build scalable, transferable businesses while creating lasting value beyond the founder. Laurie, welcome to the show. That is an amazing bio and decorated career you have thus far.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm really excited to be with you. Thanks for having me on the show.
And tell us, just to kick it off, tell us a little bit about, you're on a podcast. I want to learn a little bit more about your podcast. Tell us, you're 230 episodes in. What made you start that? What's the premise of it? And why should people go check it out?
It was a medium that I thought would be an interesting one because I really wanted to learn more about business owner experience and get the stories. When you have your own stories, you can tell the stories. When you don't, you need to learn from others and get their stories. So I thought stories. Okay, that's interesting. And then I was in the shower, right? And I just got this epiphany. I was thinking about my experience, and you said it in your intro. I was a CEO of a company. What we can tell the listeners here is that it was a third generation company. I was hired in from the outside to run a division, and I was non-family. So I was a hired gun. And I thought I was going to be there for 20 years, and I wasn't there for 20. I was there for 3. And the reason why, as you said in the intro, was an acquisition. We were acquired by a global firm, and nobody saw that coming. This company was 125 years old, very well established, over $1 billion in revenue, the total business. And when I looked back on my experience after the integration and then leaving, I just kept coming back to this multi-generational transition that the business had successfully from Gen 1 to Gen 2 to Gen 3. What did they do right when they got that baton? What did they do differently? And I just kept thinking about succession. And then boom, in that shower, it was like Succession Stories. So that's where the name comes from. It's really kind of honoring that company experience. But then I thought about, well, what are the pillars of the show? What are the things in my experience over my career and then observations with this third gen company and other clients? And I was thinking about the pillars, and I kept coming back to 3, which is innovation, growth, and transition. And so every episode is really covers one or more pillars. Some stories cover all 3. Certainly deep on one or the other, but that's the anchor of the show. And we launched it 6 years ago, which, if you do the math, was 2020. And the other thing that ended up being an amazing benefit, Nick, was we weren't able to meet anybody face to face. But now I had a medium where I was meeting with guests from all over the world and connecting with strangers, really. And it was fabulous in that way. So I was accomplishing many goals. One was try to become a thought leader in the space, and you start with a cold start. How do you do that, right? The other one was really the connecting and the continuous learning and making an impact for the industry. So that was the premise of the show 6 years ago, and I believe it's still true today.
Yeah, so it's called Succession Stories Podcast. I'm sure it's at all the places you can find podcasts. So go check out Laurie's show. And like I said, we were talking offline. Stories. That's a great way for people to get engaged, but also learn from experiences that people have gone through in real life. And you also wrote a book, the Business Transition Handbook. Tell us a little bit about that book.
It was a labor of love. I never thought I'd write a book. And here I had this corpus of transcripts. I had it at the time I started writing the book. I think I was about 120 episodes into all the shows. And in the beginning, for all the episodes, I had transcripts for everything. So my original thought was, I'm going to do, like, I don't know if anybody listens and they'll probably chuckle, that Howard Stern, he's a great interviewer. And he had done a book where he had interviews in the book, and it was really just excerpts from these interviews. And I thought, oh, I can do that. That'll be great. And then I started reading them and I'm like, no, this is boring as hell. I can't do this. And so then I scrapped that idea. And then I went to the next idea, which is, all right, if I put myself in the shoes of the business owner, who is my core audience, right? What do they care about? Well, they care about gain. Well, what kind of gain? Well, maybe one day having an exit that they're really happy about. And then what else do they care about? Well, they care about avoiding the pain. Pain of what? Well, there's lots of pain of being a business owner. And so that became the premise of the book, of the Business Transition Handbook, is how to create valuable exit options and avoid the pitfalls. And so we don't want to step in it. And knowing what the pitfalls are along the way is just as helpful as setting those big lofty goals and saying, yeah, I'm going to go achieve them, right? We need both. And so that was really the premise. And I call it handbook on purpose because every chapter leans in on action. What can you do? And then what I ended up doing was more ninja style excerpts from my show, where I would have the chapter. I laid out all the chapters, let's say 13 of them, and in order on purpose, kind of if our listeners are familiar with the Exit Planning Institute framework, one of them is the three-legged stool. And if we take away one leg, things kind of fall apart. The three legs are personal, financial, and business transition planning or exit planning. I like to say transition planning for good reason, and we can talk about that. And so that's really the layout of the book, is we start with the personal transition purposefully. Then we shift gears into financial, and then the rest of the book is really about what do we need to do to create value and avoid the pitfalls. A lot of these tripwires, business owners, if they know they exist, they can avoid them or they can fix them. And that's really the premise, is a book that you can use all on your entrepreneurial journey. It's a great gift for advisors to give to clients. One of the things that surprised me is the audience of startups, how they're like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing, because now they're getting the information sooner versus some of the folks, like my clients, have told me, oh, I wish I had your book 10 years ago. So that's really why I wrote the book, is I wanted to get it in the hands of more people. I wanted this knowledge to get out in the world sooner, because I kept hearing on the show when I interviewed business owners, the number one thing when they talk about a regret or something they would change, it's really consistent, Nick, that people say, I wish I knew this sooner. I wish I started sooner. And that fuels why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Well, let's dive in, because you mentioned the pitfalls that business owners, if they knew at the time, could avoid them. So why don't you go through some of the common pitfalls that business owners should know about, and then maybe how we can avoid them to put the businesses in a better place.
Yeah. So one framework is to think about 3 core categories of risk, and then we can branch from there. How transferable is your business is sort of a big topic. The transferability of assets. One of the exercises I like to do with clients is really straightforward, but it really opens their eyes. What is an asset of the business? I'm not just talking about FFE. I'm not just talking about a lease, or it's the intangibles that matter. And so when I have them really think about the asset list, especially if it's got a brand, right? We have a website, we have a brand name. Do we have any intellectual property that we've gotten trademarks, or do we have any process patents? It's your customer list. Frankly, sometimes the value is hidden in these everyday things that we use, and business owners need to think like the buyer. What is it that the buyer is going to benefit from? And so in addition to creating the list of, all right, what are these assets in the business that a buyer might want? Phone number. I mean, I'm talking everything, right? Make the list. Then we can discern a ranking. I have them do a ranking of, well, how relatively easy or difficult is it to transfer these things? And I'll give you an example. So one of the examples that isn't not easy to transfer, maybe, is the designation like a small business owner, women business owner or minority business owner. Transferable, yes, but with conditions, right? And it also would then influence the type of transaction that we do. It probably needs to be an equity sale, that kind of thing. And so it's not that there is an impossibility on the transferability in all cases. It just is an awareness of who the right fit buyer might be. Because if a lot of revenue, go back to the government designations, small business designations, if a lot of your revenue is tied to, if let's say you're in construction and you get bid access because of your designation, well, a buyer's going to look at that and do a pretty big haircut on your value if they can't benefit from the access you've had because of the designation you've had if they don't share that. I know that's probably very obvious to M&A advisors who are listening, but it's not so obvious to the business owner. So that's just one example. So a risk in that case would be if we are thinking that our revenue stream as is will have the enterprise value we expect and not thinking through a diversification. That's one example. There's other risks too, but that's just one example. So that's kind of on the transferability side. There's other things that can make your business less transferable. The other big category is the owner, frankly. Owner dependent businesses are less transferable, less valuable. When I want to exaggerate, I'll say they're worthless. I know that's not always true, but I try to make a point to get people to go, oh, wait, what do you mean by that? And if we are the bottleneck in decision making, if our owner is doing product and service delivery, if they're bringing in more than 40 of revenue themselves, those are all red flags. And an owner dependent business has more challenges transferring at a value that they want. They're certainly not going to get a premium. They'll probably get a discount because the buyer is evaluating, will I benefit if that owner leaves, or what am I going to have to rebuild? What's it going to cost me? And then the third category that I would say kind of impedes and sort of shows risk is the bench. Now it's the bench of employees. So the bench is related, of course, to the owner dependency. If we have no bench, then obviously, we've got something to talk about there. But we can still have a bench of people with responsibilities who are good people and loyal, but there could be risk around some of them. There's attributes of loyalty that we might see, and that's great, but will they stay? And so a buyer cares about continuity, and they want to make sure that, especially if the owner's not staying on long, maybe they stay on a bit as a consultant, but they want that next bench of people, most likely, to run this company who know it inside and out. And there are things that we can do to help mitigate those risks of those people leaving. And so that process really can't happen overnight. So those are just a few examples.
What are some of the things you recommend business owners do to keep their bench, or maybe get rid of the ones that aren't so great?
I think there's some great tools out there, which we can talk about in a moment. I'll come back to it. I think the core thing is just good leadership and culture, starting off with that. And people work for people they love and respect, right? Maybe not love, but respect for sure, and appreciate working with. When I say love, I'm actually thinking about a client family environment that they've created, and it really is a special place. So maybe the word love is really they're coming to the front of my mind. I realize that's unusual, but you can have a family and culture. You got to stand behind it. You got to really care about your people, and you got to be a good manager. You got to be a good leader. If you're a total, I don't know if you swear on your show, but you know what I mean. If you're not somebody that people like, then that's a problem. So if we assume that we have a good, healthy culture, that's the starting point, right? And then from there, I believe is about building opportunity and understanding what people care about. So I've created a succession assessment, because here's a mistake that I see a lot, especially in the services industry that I serve, which is construction, engineering, AEC, the AEC industry, architecture. They hire really good people, and then they grow them and they grow the bench. And then they assume that some of those folks are going to want an ownership stake and run the business one day. And there's a difference between leadership succession and ownership succession. And so in service firms, sometimes we hire in, again, good, talented strengths, good people, but they're not necessarily well suited as an owner. They might be more interested in cash versus equity. So that's not the characteristic that we need. But we don't interview for that, right? So it's a bit of a challenge because you're talking about, in some cases, a decade or more away. So when it comes to who's on the bench, we can have the strength finder assessments. We can use all these tools to find out all their great things about these people and obviously see what they deliver for us over time. But at some point, there becomes this fork in the road where we want to start having ownership conversations, and they might peel off and say, that's not for me. That happened so in doing M&A work, a prospect reached out and he owned a architecture firm and said not only did his second in command not want the baton, right, did not want ownership, he quit. And so when I was getting this call and saying, hey, I'm ready to sell my business, it was really out of a crisis because he didn't have a succession plan at that point. And he was very upset. He felt betrayed. And if we were going to rewind that and do a case study, I'd say that's a failure of the process because he probably never had the conversations. So, in terms of the bench itself, you got to pick the right people, but then you have to be understanding what is it that they want and understanding that and checking in over time and then building a development plan that gets them there. There are tools to help with retention, like a SAR plan. I'm a fan of the SAR plan. If you're familiar with that, it's a stock appreciation rights, different from phantom stock. Phantom stock and STAR are kind of similar concept, but different in execution. SAR plan, I think there's I would lean in on that first for anybody thinking about it. But yeah, the bench is complicated.
It is. When you're working with a client and they're talking about exiting, and you talk about the bench, related to the bench and the management team and your employees and things like that. Confidentiality, is at its height during the exit process or considering selling, because to be honest, you don't want them to leave, right? In your opinion, in your experience, and how in your framework and how you're working with these business owners, what is your opinion on, and I know every situation is a little bit unique, but what is your opinion on when do you communicate to the key employees, the leadership team, the succession plan that you have in place that they're going to stick around? Like, when do you recommend, whether it's you with the business owner, or maybe it's during the exit process, maybe it's that far along where they're already going to market and looking for buyer. Like, when do you think is the right time to bring in those key employees that, hey, we're thinking about selling this company?
I think that it's a tricky situation. Sort of acknowledge that there's no one answer here. So given that, maybe we describe some characteristics of when you might bring someone in, when you might not. I believe keeping it small and tight. Okay. So you could create conceptually a red team, call it the red team, call it whatever you want. It's a deal team. It's something. It's an exit evaluation team. And it's people who are in the loop, in the know, and contributing actively. And it's in addition to their day job. I mean, that frankly was my experience when I was at the third giant company, as I mentioned. There were myself and about 10 other executives. We were all sort of signed in on the deal team, and we could not talk about it. I didn't even talk about it with my husband. So it's thoughtful as to who needs to be in the process with you. You'll also want to consider the outside advisors, right? The lawyers and so on that are going to be helpful, as well as an M&A advisor, of course. So once you've created the deal team, I think that sort of answers itself. Steps ahead of that, I think, sort of splits the tree at certain versus uncertain. If we're kicking the tires and sort of exploring and thinking about exit options, there's a lot of uncertainty about what we want as an owner, what you want as an owner. And that uncertainty can create unintended uncertainty and not discontentment, but just kind of like making people feel really like they're in a gray space. And that wasn't your intention. You were just sharing and you want their thoughts, but it has the consequence of them feeling like, wow, things are really uncertain right now. My owner doesn't know what he or she wants to do. So therefore, I don't know what that means for me. People very, very quickly go to the WIFM, right? What's in it for me, especially when it looks like the end is near, whatever the end is. And they start to shut down, or they start to have the cooler talk or the Zoom talk or whatever it is these days. And that's a distraction because you need to run the business and you need people to focus on the business. So that's my worry. If the team is too big, or if we are doing it too soon and reading people in too soon, or reading people in that aren't really actively contributing. They're just in the need to know, but they're not needing to know. So it's too soon. That's the big wrestle that I have, honestly. I have one client that's really democratic in nature of how he runs his business. He's been reading some key people in, which has been fine. But now I'm advising we got to go back to just the owners here, because there's some things we need to talk about that are just meant for the owners only. That's my sensitivity as an advisor. Is I know sometimes clients want to share and get opinions, but then for me, it feels like potential oversharing and also potential influence of a decision when it's really, what are the decision factors to be made? And I want to make sure those influences are the right influences. So like I said, it's complicated.
This episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast is powered by Cornerstone International Alliance, where leading M&A firms come together. As part of this international network, you get access to global opportunities, over 200 M&A experts, enhanced collaboration and knowledge sharing, and some of the best M&A tools and resources available, all to help you take your firm to the next level. Ready to join this exclusive network? Visit cornerstoneia.com/new member today. It is. There's no right or wrong answer. And, a lot of it can depend on the business owner too, whether he or she wants to bring people in, is dead set against not doing it until it sells, which can pose its own challenges. And it's just it's more or less a case by case basis, but it's a fine line of, bringing people in that are going to need to know and benefit, or are going to help with the process, compared to blow everything up. And, now there's this fear of, am I going to keep my job? Am I going to lose my job? Well, if that's going to be the case, I'm going to leave sooner than the consequences of that for the value of the business, take a hit too. So it is not a canned answer. It's definitely depends, and you got to feel out the process and the business owner, and then who the key people are, if they can keep it confidential or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about, when we're looking at talking to business owners about the right buyer, you say not any buyer, but the right buyer. What do you mean by that statement? And maybe explain that a little bit.
I think every seller has a vision of who the right buyer is, and we need to unpack that. And when I work with clients on creating exit options, it's just that, right? We can say, well, we think category A, category B, category C. And a lot of times they will say what they don't want rather than who they want. So I have one client that's very adamant, I would never sell to blah, blah, blah competitor. Okay, cool. Well, there's a lot of other companies out there. So does that mean you would never do a third party sale, or you would just never sell to that third party? So there's some biases sometimes that you have to help them unwind. And then other times it's a awareness of certain options and not a full awareness of the options. So what would be an option that's probably not realistic? An IPO. Okay, cool. Let's cross it off the list. Great. Now, what else is out there? Well, they say, well, selling to a third party. Yes, what else is out there? And that's where they stop. They don't know more than that. Or they might be familiar with, oh, well, there's roll-ups in PE. Yes, but did you know that there's different kinds of roll-ups? Are you a platform or are you an add-on? And then they go, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Or then another type of financial buyer is an ESOP. And some are familiar with ESOP. Another one is a employee ownership trust. That's also a financial transaction and a financial buyer. But you can have modifiers on each of those. Well, what about this hybrid, or what about that with a modified MBO? Yeah, great. Let's talk about that. MBO fits into management buyout, fits into more of the related buyer category, which is family and management team. So I have some clients that start out on, I'm gonna sell to a third party. Like I have one client in his 40s, and he's envisioning a big sale in the future, and we're dialing in on value growth for not a sprint, but this is a marathon, right? But that's where he is. He knows this is a third party sale and he's all in on a strategic sale. Great. Okay. Or, PE in the future. Another client of mine who's in his 70s is really leaning in on, would like a solution that keeps the culture and the management team and potentially engages them as owners. So that's different, right? Then I have another client, he's in his 50s and he has family in the business, but they're not interested in ownership. They could do it in a crisis if needed. That's not really what their interest is. And so for him, it's a different solution. We got to solve the crisis part first, get that set up, because in any business, you got to mitigate the risk there. And we could talk about that. And so we're evaluating some options there that helps honor his desire to also not overburden his wife, should something happen to him. And so there's a trust with his family members, but then also a real look in the mirror realization that they don't want to run the business long term. And that's what it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about really understanding. You might think that the person's going to take the baton from you, and then they're going to be like a hot potato. They're like, darn it, now what do I do with this thing? They don't want it, they don't want them. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? It's not suited for everybody. So those are some of the things that I think about.
Yeah. Now, you were part of this as the CEO of a company that did not sell to the next generation. What has your experience been like, as an advisor when that is on the table, but maybe it's, like you said, it's not really on the table? And I guess the second question to that is, are you seeing more companies not selling to the next generation just because maybe the next generation isn't interested as much as in previous years or generations? And how does the whole dynamic work when you're looking at, a family business? Are they going to transfer to the next generation? Maybe they're not interested. Maybe they're not the right fit. There's a lot of different dynamics there that could play a role in that.
What's so interesting as an M&A advisor, I know we think about third party sales a lot. We think about, the sales to PE. The reality is in the lower middle market, the privately held company space, probably, I don't have the math on it. I've been trying to find the data. Most transactions are internal transfers, if you think about it, right? Between family and management. And so one of the things I am seeing is that there is a desire to have that work out. And then some people say, well, that's not going to work out, so therefore I'll go to my next option, right? Back to the option A, option B, option C. And I think that's a healthy way to look at it. It's okay for you to have a preference. It's okay to make it happen. Yeah. So why would, what's happening out there? In some cases, we have a skip generation issue where we just have an age gap. I'm seeing it with one of the, I serve on two family boards. I'm an advisor, independent advisor. And one of them is definitely a skip generation issue. There's definitely desire. There's a family desire for Gen 3 to rise up, but Gen 3 is in his 20s, and Gen 2, there's going to be a gap. And so that's sometimes the reality is we have a desire, but the time doesn't serve us, and so we have to think about a middle ground there. The other thing that comes up sometimes is like we talked about, sort of the opt out. This isn't for me. I see that a lot. Really healthy businesses, really, making great cash flow. Kids aren't in the business, not interested, just going on their own path. In fact, I had one client it was a coaching client, husband and wife, and then also turned into an M&A client on the sell side. And the reason on the coaching was I needed to help them really assess who's the right fit buyer. They thought maybe their son would be interested. Son was getting a PhD, not in the same city, getting married, starting a new life, right? And really knew nothing about their business. And when I helped them understand that, right, and help them have conversations with their son, they realized, yeah, the option A is not an option. Let's go to option B. Option B was another internal transfer. Do we have two managers? Would they want to own this business? I gave them some suggested questions and how to have a conversation. For example, you can do a hypothetical, hey, Sally, hypothetical conversation with her would be like, how do you get to the point of understanding her motivations of cash versus equity? So in a scenario of, hey, if we were going to bonus you some money and you were going to turn around and do something with that, would you rather, take your family on a vacation, or would you buy shares of equity in the company? And how Sally answers tells you a lot, doesn't it? They had one manager said, "Oh, I'll take the cash. I'm good." Right. And they had another manager who's like, he was ready to mortgage his house. Really different perspective. Right. And then the third option for that particular client was a private equity group, which they did end up selling to. But, to their credit, they really thought through option A and B. It just didn't work out. It wasn't the right fit. And the management team has stayed on. And so they did a good job with retention. But I think that was a good story because they really did give consideration to the other options, and then they said it's not a fit. So, let's go to option C.
Have you, when you look at a transfer from generation to generation, a lot of times, you would want to recommend to the current owner, don't just gift it to them. You want to get what you need out of the business. So, sell it to them, correct? Like how does that conversation happen, or how's that gone in your experience? And do you see it as an actual sale, or just like I'm going to just give the business to my son because he's the next generation?
I'm not a tax advisor, and I think certainly a tax advisor would need to weigh in on this from the gifting and all of that. But that said, I think conceptually, mostly I've seen sellers who want people to have skin in the game. So if you're gifting, you can do it in a way where they're still making a choice, So it could be percentages over time, especially with options to the business bonuses cash, and then they turn around and use that to buy shares, right? There's a mechanism of choice rather than just pure share gifting. Now, again, the tax benefit to the company is probably worth talking through with your tax advisor on that and pros and cons. But I think there's a psychology to it also, because you want people to have an owner mentality. If you're just given something and inherently you don't even want it, like, is that exciting to you? So if you're choosing the yes on that and say, yeah, I'm doing this and I'm using the money I was bonus to purchase shares, like, there's a choice, and that's important.
And I was too thinking that, more from the running of the business side of it is, is the next generation going to be vested in the success of it if they're just giving it to it, or if they're actually purchasing it? I feel like, to your point, having skin in the game, they're going to be more apt to run it as an actual business as opposed to like a fun little lifestyle thing that they have on the side.
Yeah, I agree.
And Laurie, you talk about, and I got one or two more questions for you. You were a CEO in a pretty large business who was part of an exit, M&A advisor. Now you're doing some coaching and exit planning, and just all those three perspectives. How does that differentiate yourself as working with these business owners and setting yourself apart? Because a lot of times I'm an exit planner, or I'm an M&A advisor, and they all work together in concert. But for yourself to have experience in all three of those areas, I think that's pretty unique and interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's pretty unique as well. And that's how I try to make an impact and benefit my clients. One of the biggest things is being able to help them build with an exit in mind and build with transition in mind, because it's healthier for them, it's healthier for the business. And that's what I really help them see over the journey of being an entrepreneur. The other part of it is helping them see their business through an outside lens. And I've seen a lot, right? So certainly my lens is one opinion, but I also take that to the next step, which is help them see their business through a buyer's lens, because I put the buyer hat on, given my M&A experience, and understanding them so helping them understand what's awesome and working really well in their business, and saying, great, complimenting them, right? Feeling good about that. And not only focusing on the negatives of, well, we need to work on your owner dependency, and your financials are a mess. And, we got to work on fixing these things. You need a second in command and blah, blah, blah. We're always going to find the things they need to improve, but I also want to make it balanced. And in addition to that, there's an IQ and an EQ to this. Okay. And many wonderful advisors are transactional. That's great. Okay. They should be. That's fine. I mean, I've been there. I get it. But this is very emotional too. And so I come at it with a process that I talk about: the head, heart, and the wallet. And I incorporate all three. And my clients have opened up to me about all kinds of things. They trust me. And I trust, and I'm that's important to me, because I want to be able to serve them and serve their interests in a way that, I'm holding them accountable to the things they've said they want to accomplish. They love that. They're finding the clarity on these puzzle pieces of their life that have really been swirling in their head, and they feel very alone. And then I'm also helping them to put together these answers of like, well, how would I, my clients who are in their mid 50s, 5 to 7 years out from an exit, they want to get the pieces right. They don't want to do what the baby boomers are doing, which is waiting way too long to figure this stuff out. So that's, I think, the biggest, what I've brought to the table and why my clients enjoy working with me.
Yeah, it's you got experience in all the different facets, and like we said offline, a lot of times M&A advisors are working with someone to do the value enhancement, the exit planning work, and working together. But that's something that you're doing kind of both of, as well as leveraging that experience from when you helped run a company that exited as well. And you're creating a lot of great resources and tools out there for business owners, which is amazing. So, Laurie, appreciate it. As we sign off, what are those tools and resources one more time for the business owners that you've created, that you worked on? You put a lot of time, effort, and energy into creating these, and where can they find them?
My website has a lot of the resources there for them. So btsherpa.com/assessment will get them the succession assessment that I mentioned. If they want to answer a few questions, they will get the responses emailed to them immediately. And it's a great check-in on, hey, am I on the right track with my people, or what do I need to be thinking about here? So that's worth spending just a couple of minutes on doing. I would definitely recommend that. My podcast and my book are also accessible from the website, so they can find those there. And, people can reach out to me, Laurie@btsherpa.com, if they have any questions at all, or just want to chat about any of the concepts from today's show.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Make sure to connect with Laurie. Check out her website, her podcast, and her book. A lot of great resources for you, whether you are an advisor and want to share it with your business owner clients, or you are a business owner and want to, understand more of the exit process and how to build value and how to be exit ready many, many years in advance. Check out all those resources. We'll put the link in the show notes as well. Laurie, thank you so much for joining the show. I really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation here today. If you did enjoy our conversation, make sure to share with anybody who you think could benefit from what we talked about here today. Like, share, and comment on the episode. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, anywhere you get podcasts. Click that notification icon and make sure you get notified every time a brand new episode airs, which is typically every Thursday morning. Tune in every week and make sure to let us know what you think of the episodes of the M&A Mastermind Podcast. Until next time, everybody, take care. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cornerstone International Alliance. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with more insights, strategies, and real-life experiences to help you take your M&A game to the next level.